makeup, medicines, and shampoo. Do you know what these products have in common?
Seaweed!
Seaweed is used to produce carrageenan and agar, which acts as a thickener or gelling agent that is used extensively across many industries, particularly in the manufacturing of food, personal care products, and pharmaceuticals. Seaweed production occurs all over the world, but closest to us is seaweed farming in Indonesia, which is the world's leading exporter of unprocessed seaweed. The seaweed value chain starts from seaweed farmers in coastal communities to local collectors, larger traders, carrageenan and agar processing companies, and blended producers that manufacture end products. Other stakeholders like the government and NGOs are also involved in the seaweed industry. In particular, Indonesian authorities plan to develop the seaweed industry as part of the blue economy model, transitioning from a declining fishery industry to capitalize on the sustainable aquaculture to drive national economic growth and alleviate poverty, especially since it requires low capital investment. However, this vision of the government requires a re-examination of Indonesia's seaweed supply chain. In particular, connections with local seaweed collectors is important for rural seaweed farmers to sell their produce in larger and farther markets. Additionally, local collectors often provide the initial setup loans and materials for the seaweed farm. In return, the farmers will exclusively offer their harvest to their local collector, which they then sell to upstream entities for profit. Hence, farmers are affiliated in debt or kept in a captive relationship with their local collector, with collectors sometimes even refusing to accept repayment to prolong these relationships. As such, this forms an informal regulatory exclusion that restricts the farmers' access to a free market, enabling seaweed price monopoly and wealth accumulation at the expense of the farmers. This diminishes incentives to improve farming processes and harvest quality, impeding the industry's development. However, these unequal forms of agreement also prevails along the whole marketing supply chain, bestowing the upstream processors with excessive amount of power to determine the market value of seaweed, therefore suppressing the eventual profit translated to the farmers. Despite the unevenness in power relations, some farmers prefer to enter such captive relationships as it allows them to mitigate against the precariousness of agriculture. With reference to Butler's concept of precarity, where we understand a person's life as relationally dependent with others, seaweed farmers' yield and income relies on a good weather and healthy growth cycle. Like many other farmers, their livelihoods could be jeopardized with a poor harvest by storms or diseases. Therefore, working with a local collector offers much needed flexibility in debt repayment and also assures access to materials for the next farming cycle, enabling families to sustain their livelihoods and overcome precarious situations. While the country leads as the world's largest exporter of seaweed, a large proportion of seaweed are being exported as low-value raw materials, losing out on potential earnings from exporting value-added seaweed products. As such, Indonesian President Joko Widodo envisioned the transformation of the seaweed farming industry with a national roadmap into an exporter of value-added materials by identifying and developing selected provinces with potential into seaweed growth hubs. These growth hubs are imagined to be an integrated industrial zone that brings the processing industry closer to centers of seaweed production. Accompanied by the marketization of the industry, it is hoped that investments directed towards these growth hubs can help to increase seaweed production, enhance the seaweed value chain, and bring about poverty alleviation for impoverished coastal communities. While the idea of these growth hubs sound promising, the potential in developing these local processing facilities needs to be assessed relationally with other markets. For one, more established processing facilities also exist in China and Philippines, offering competitive prices and greater efficiency in production. In order to rise above their competitors, Indonesia's processing facilities would likely have to lower processing prices as a strategy to attract more business. However, the lowering of prices doesn't just affect the processing industry itself. They also impact how much upstream stakeholders can profit from the entire value chain. How much then can seaweed farmers really earn? So how will the seaweed industry grow from here? Modern seaweed farming techniques are increasingly mechanized, possibly displacing farmers who do not have the capital to compete and transforming labor relations, reproducing deeply rooted patterns of income inequality. There are signs that other issues stemming from processed seaweed may yet threaten the industry. For example, carrageenan is at risk of being banned from the list of approved organic ingredients owing to suspected health concerns. Excluding carrageenan from high-value organic products would cause seaweed prices to fall, jeopardizing farmers' livelihoods. With our insights into the Indonesian seaweed industry, we hope that you can see the seaweed you consume in a new light.
Thank you for watching!